As always, this is for entertainment purposes only. Use your discernment and take from this video what you may. I am experimenting with this video with AI, and you will see my face again on the next one. All of the words are mine, I just had Pictory AI craft the video. As you probably know by now by listening to my story, I love experimentation. For now, this will be the only one like this until you see my face actually telling you I am doing another one. You know I have to be safe and make sure those copycats out there can't play with you all by pretending they are me. Fair warning, this may trigger some of you, and for some of you, you may not want to hear about sex, sexuality, or even listen to experiences. Feel free to skip this video and the journey if it is not for you. For those of you still with me, sex and sexuality are an important piece of the human experience. And candidly, in a lot of cases, create the most angst and shame for people. I shared this on the first video I posted, but it bears repeating. I am sharing my journey in order to help normalize being your true authentic self. Most of my stories are not even known by my closest friends. But I cannot ask those who are willing to go on their own journey to be bold and not do it myself. I am trying to catch up on the chronology of my healing journey that I am sharing with you, and this is from December of last year. I know I need to record more often. It is still not my favorite thing to do. But I hold true to the statement that if hearing my story helps even one person process their own healing in a way that works for them by sharing my story, then I will consider this all worth it. Okay, now on to the story. Just like I talked about in my last video, I realized that I had made up my own fairy tale. Now that I had come to terms with logic, I realized that there wasn't a big mystery. I just simply wanted something hottie-did-ent, and it was time to move on. I was doing more hiking, and because I was enjoying being one with Mother Nature much more. And seeing animals every day was making the downloads come much more freely. And if you have been listening to my videos, you know that most of the process that I am telling you about that I take myself through ends up coming from downloads. And on one of my hikes, I got the download that I needed to process both sexuality and my history of relationships. They tie together, but to put them both into one video would be way too long. So I would recommend that you listen to both as they tie together both chronologically and also to give you full context. I know that I am going through my journey chronologically as I went through it, but know that this video and the next one definitely go together in my growing and evolving. I am going to tackle sexuality one street. In order to figure out what had formed my fairy tale version of love, I needed as always go back to what formulated my proverbial mud. I needed to look back to my childhood, what I learned through watching and what I heard from my family and what I interpreted that society was inferring and telling me about my own sexuality. As I thought about what had formed my own view of who I was as a woman and a sexual being, there were so many moments that I realized put layers of mud on top of me. And to get my authentic self to live exactly how I wanted to, I needed to dissect all of those layers. There were so many moments when I was a child that dumped mud on me that was a heavy burden on letting me fly with exactly who I was, and I didn't even realize it. Before I was 14, and to be candid, I don't remember the exact age I was at any of these moments, there were a series of things that happened that framed some of my subconscious boulders that were preventing me from being both confident and truly who I was. When I was young, we had a teenager babysitter that actually took care of us by playing strip poker with us at the time. I remember thinking it was really weird, but I didn't really speak up. Around 12, I remember my best friend at the time telling me to shower with her. It was in my house, and I don't know where the hell my parents were, but I remember getting in the shower with her, us soaping each other up, and then she kissed me. Now in retrospect, I realize she was attracted to women, but at the time I didn't really think through that. I just know that when I was in the shower and she was touching me and kissing me, I merely decided that it just wasn't my thing. I remember as soon as she kissed me I said thanks, but it really wasn't my thing, and jumped out of the shower. I just thought in my head I just like boys period, and then told her that and told her that I didn't want that to happen again. You would think it would be awkward with her afterwards, but to be honest, it wasn't even a thing. We just went back to being friends. In my family, sex wasn't really talked about, with the exception of that you don't have sex until you get married. Hell, the women in my family didn't even use tampons. My sister is quite a bit older than me, and I am sure she will just love me talking about this, and I really looked up to her when she came home to Saudi from the US. We spent hours talking as we shared a room when she was home, and I remember being in complete awe of hearing her talk about her dates with the guy who later became her husband. I remember hanging on every single detail of every story and being fascinated with her story. It was straight out of a movie. He was her Prince Charming and her dates sounded like a fairy tale. I also remember that I called her Dolly Parton because I thought she had huge boobs. Of course at the time it was because my boobs were just developing. Within this same time frame, there were two other memories that I carried in my subconscious from early childhood. The first one is that I was molested. I remember telling my mom about them touching me and rubbing me over a period of time. I heard her, I was hiding and she didn't know I was there, talking to them about it. And then nothing else came of it and it was buried like the rest of the family secrets. We never talked about it again. I do remember sliding down the banister in my house from the upstairs to the downstairs because I liked the feeling on my crotch at the time. I really didn't label it masturbation, and for the record I am still a big fan of masturbation. I didn't share it with anyone. I remember that I was ashamed about doing it then, but would sneak and do it when nobody was looking. I was pretty young at the time. The second memory was my first experience with watching porn. Just for context, when I was a kid and playing on sports team because we were in Saudi and didn't have tons of teams to play, we would practice a lot with limited games and then we would fly to another city in Saudi and compete in tournaments where the teams we were competing against would host you to spend the weekend. It was one of those sports tournaments that I was introduced to porn. Looking back on it, I was laughing as I remember we were in this family's house and all the kids walked into a room where there were those beads hanging down from the door frame, you know, the ones back in the 70s that go most of the way to the floor? Anyways, I digress. We were all at one family's house in the basement and then they turned on a movie. One by one the kids started pairing up and hooking up, and when I looked at the TV, it was two women having sex with each other. I remember looking at everyone in the room hooking up and remember deciding I could either pretend that I was watching the porn, which I didn't really label as porn at the time, or I could hook up with the guy that I was supposed to. And I remember not being attracted to this guy. And I remember while I felt a little pressure to fit in, I decided that I didn't care. And watched the porn, or at least pretended to, and left the poor guy alone. In high school, I went back to a private boarding school in the States while the family stayed in Saudi. They didn't really have high school in Saudi. While I will talk in the next video about relationships, I do remember as it relates to sexuality two things. The first thing is I always dressed down for dates on purpose. I decided in my head that if on the first date they didn't like me at my worst, then I didn't want to go out with them again. The second thing was that I was always upfront with my dates that I wasn't going to sleep with them. While my family fabric said to not sleep with anyone until you married them, I had decided that I wasn't going to sleep with anyone until I was in love with them and was always upfront about that with my dates. I didn't date tons of men but did date a handful. Fast forward to 16 years old, and on a trip with my mom, I met a 26-year-old. My mom knew him and his best friend, so I spent the trip in Hawaii driving around the island with them. When we came back from the trip, I was dating him, and as I am sure would expect, when the rest of my family heard, they hit the roof. Now at the time, I have to tell you, he took good care of me and it was really innocent, at least on my part. He took me to my first concert, gave me a place to hang out and get out of my boarding school dorm, and took me on dates while I made out with him. That is as far as it went. After a couple of weeks, I was ready to break up with him. At the same time, my dad called me from Saudi Arabia and was livid. He told me that if I didn't break up with this guy, he was going to come pick me up in the States and take me back for good to Saudi. Now I have to be honest, I have talked about my relationship with my dad on an earlier video, and because he was yelling at me and telling me that I had to break up with him, it made me do the exact opposite. So I told my dad that I broke up with him, and just to spite my dad, dated the guy for a couple more months. And yes, clearly not my best decision making at the time, and yes, I am still hard-headed and don't take orders from anyone, still haven't grown out of that. At 19, I met a guy that I will talk about more in the relationship video, but short version is I fell madly in love with him. He opened me up in a way that I have never had before. When I met him, I really didn't have tons of confidence as a woman, and the way he treated me and loved me made my confidence soar based on his love. Again, I will talk about our relationship more on the next video, but I lost my virginity to him on a cruise, and with the most magical experience. We danced, he romanced me, we made love, everything you could ever ask for in an experiencing sex for the first time. It really was a fairy tale. It was incredible. I spent 5 years with him and lived with him, and while I was with him, I was able to finally experiment with my sexual needs. While I was still always self-conscious about my body, I loved sex with him and experimenting with sex toys, positions, porn, drag strip shows, just lots of experiences, and he sparked my love of public non-public sex. What I mean by that is making love behind a hotel or in a bar bathroom where anyone can walk in on us, or on a pool table upstairs in a bar, or lots of other various places. I was completely free to play, laugh and love with him. He opened up a whole new world. I went from a virgin to really owning the nickname he had for me, Miss Nympho. He also was my first experience in fielding swinging invites. We went out to dinner with a couple who were my friends, and in the middle of talking about something benign, they invited us to swing with them. Now at the time, I really wasn't sure how you evolve into that conversation, but I can tell you that at that time it threw us for a loop. He looked at me like, "You field this one?" It took me 3 seconds, and then I thanked them for the invitation, and then just simply told them I don't share, and I meant it. At the time I had a real problem with jealousy. More later, but knew there was nothing in my man that wanted to swing, so I handled it for the both of us. After I lived with and dated him for 5 years, we broke up, and a short time later I moved to DC. In order to adapt to AI needs, I am making this a 2-part video.